When Rain dragged herself home, she was surprised by the small family gathering. Her family all had their own lives, so they rarely gathered together like this. She joined them and flopped into the couch next to her sister, Catherine. Rain asked, "This isn't some ambush to get me to marry the dragon?" She sat up and eyed them all suspiciously. When they looked confused, she accepted that wasn't the point of the gathering and returned to a more casual pose on the chair. "The dragon offered for you. Should we be forcing you to marry him?" This came from Everett. He was the only one shocked though. Her sister had known about it. A little surprising since Catherine hardly ever raised her head for rumors, even family rumors. Her mother said, "No, if anything we want you guys to marry who you wish. The last thing we would like for you all is to be trapped in a marriage. That is a lifetime of torture. We think you need to have a good person by your side. So, if you aren't all here to pressure me into marrying the dragon, then what is this family gathering about?" Rain waved her hand to indicate the family. Everyone except their sister, who was on the continent. Her father said, "We got a letter from your sister and were reading it. How is she doing?" There was only 4 years between her and her oldest sister, and their interests were so different that they had never really been able to see eye to eye. That didn't preclude her love for her sister. A condition that wouldn't change despite distance or interests. Bored, her father announced. She is finally figuring out that chasing an arrangement with a dragon isn't what she wants. What does she want? Rain thought someone amongst the horde would understand their sister even if Rain didn't. Her mother answered with a slight snort, "Children, of course. She wants to have little ones. Everything else in her life is icing. She'll figure it out." Rain was glad her parents understood their children and allowed them to follow what they needed. There was no way Rain would be where she was now without them. That had her asking, "What would you do if I got fired from my job?" So far, she was planning to arrest an ex-Bobby, and it was becoming evident that another prominent officer was involved in another crime. If it wasn't an officer, it was the dragon, and she knew she would be the sacrificial lamb to the god of political expedience if she had to arrest Victor. Her father asked, "Charles wouldn't allow that, would he?" "He might. You see, I'm pretty sure there is someone in the department who is a killer. There are too many questions and not enough answers, but I'm scared that at the end of this thread I'm pulling it will reveal a dirty peeler." She didn't tell them about the blackmailer as she didn't want them to ask any questions she couldn't answer. Her brother realized the issue straight away as he said, "No one wants egg on their face. They might sacrifice you to get rid of the embarrassment. No one said they would be happy to get rid of her because of her gender and that this would merely be the excuse." Her father hummed thoughtfully and her mother said, "It shouldn't matter. The whole reason you're there is to help people. You can't let a murderer go. What if it embarrassed Uncle Charles?" Rain pressed. "He wouldn't care. It would be others that would put the pressure on you," Lady Ancaster stated with some authority. Since her and Charles had been friends since childhood, she might have a reason for her confidence. Maybe Lady Beechworth was right and she really was bulletproof when it came to her job. Her sister said, "Whether you finish this or not, there will always be a murderer in the department. If you don't find them, someone else will. Though probably after someone else dies." Her father nodded. "We'll support you, you know that. Go with your heart." "You all know that I'm going to go after the murderer," Rain answered the question in her father's voice. Everett snorted. "That is a given." Rain shook her head at the ridiculousness of a ducal family encouraging her to scandalize their name. "You know, if it isn't a peeler, then it is the dragon. The one that wants to marry you." Bethany asked over her embroidery. Bethany was the youngest in their family and preferred the country to the city. If she was any older, their parents might have left her behind in the country, but by then it would be her turn to whirl around society. Everett poked Rain in the side and she snarled at him, "He wants to marry my hand, not me." Her father said, "He is unlikely to kill you." As if that had ever been one of her concerns, she thought sarcastically to herself. Though she had to admit her father had a point. Marriage was a risky business amongst most classes. She knew better than anyone in the family that most murders of women were committed by their husbands or lover. Her father, though, didn't dispel the idea that the dragon was only interested in her because of her brass hand. Dragons were not to be taken lightly, though. For centuries, they had been the only predator of human beings. To assume, because of the treaty, Victor wasn't violent was naive. He could have killed his wife, Rain said, though she didn't even sound convincing to herself. You don't believe that, her mother stated. Again, that authority still in her voice. This time because she knew Rain. Rain, though, felt perverse, so she asked, "Yeah, and why not?" "Because you like him." Her mother flashed her a smile. Sure, her manipulation would eventually see fruit. Only you would think that, Mom. There would be endless conversations about Victor as a suitor. His possibility of being a murderer wasn't a deal-breaker for Lady Ancaster, apparently. Her mother nodded her head with finality. You do. Rain groaned and put an arm over her eyes. I thought there wouldn't be any pressure to marry the dragon. No pressure, just an insight. Her mother defended her pressure to marry the dragon. Rain shook her head at the ridiculousness of it all. She got to her feet and said, "I'm going to bed." Don't do anything stupid. Though she was hoping for a miracle. Chapter 9. Why are we back here? Larkin asked this as they were again outside the residence of the dragon. He already knew she didn't suspect him of the murder. Though others in the office were all convinced he had killed Sebastian and Eleanor. Rain tugged on her coat to straighten it. Not afraid that Larkin would comment on it anymore. You heard the man at the pub. All he knew was that the man meeting Sebastian was a famous policeman. We can't take what we know back there. We don't know who we can trust. But the dragon was there during the investigation. Also, I want to know if he killed Eleanor. She was pretty sure he hadn't killed Sebastian, as he was right. If he was going to kill the man, it would have been years ago. And she was sure they wouldn't have found any part of his body at all. Eleanor's demise had too many questions, though, that she hoped the dragon could answer. Larkin frowned. Are you sure you want to confront him if you think he is the killer? Yes. Mostly because she didn't think he was the killer, but she had to follow the lead. A dragon wouldn't need to dump a body in the river. Eleanor could have disappeared and Victor could have admitted that she was a thief and that she had run away. No one would have questioned him whether he had merely eaten her. The dumping in the river was what a human would do. A falling out amongst thieves was more likely, or someone had noticed Eleanor in the wrong neighborhood with a lot of wealth and had thought to relieve her of it. This theory didn't explain how Sebastian got Eleanor's ring or why he kept it if it was a falling out amongst thieves. There just were too many questions, and at the moment the dragon was her only source of information. This time, when the dragon opened the door, he was dressed for guests. His face lit up and he reached for her hands. Rain stumbled back, out of his reach. Victor frowned at her recoil. You haven't come to accept my proposal. What? No. She had forgotten he had gone to her father to ask for her hand. He stepped aside so they could enter and led the way into the sitting room. It had since been cleaned and the color had returned to much of the once dust-coated furniture. Everything gleamed with a tender touch and brass and silver reflected the light. If he hadn't hired servants since she had first spoken to him, then he had certainly done a decent job of cleaning himself. He sat on the love seat and patted it to encourage her to sit down. Rain instead went for shock factor. Your wife was a con artist. He glanced at the seat and gave up trying to get her to sit with him. Thief as well. He admitted while he eyed Larkin, this is not something I feel comfortable speaking about amongst strangers. Larkin is hardly a stranger. Though she wasn't sure why she was exempt from the stranger status. She had only spoken with Victor a handful of times and always with an audience. Did he believe his offer for her hand gave them a connection that didn't exist? Victor gave her an inscrutable look, so she added, "Fine. Larkin, you can go. I'll be heading home after this." "Are you sure, my lady?" "He's a dragon." What he meant was he was a suspect for murder. That might be where the clues were leading, but Rain had a hunch there was more to it all, and she was willing to risk her life on it. Obviously, she hadn't convinced him yet of the dragon's innocence, or was he more convinced that it couldn't be a fellow peeler? "I'm sure he will abide by the treaty," Rain reassured him. Larkin grunted but tipped his hat in farewell and left. Victor patted the couch next to him. She shook her head. There was no reason to tempt the dragon with proximity. He didn't seem disappointed. Instead, he hopped up and said, "Come look at my collection." He didn't wait for her agreement and led her out of the room. Forced to follow or be left alone in the parlor, she followed him as he made his way to a long gallery. She had expected art, instead there were pedestals with glass cabinets framed in a deep mahogany. Inside were specimens she never expected in a dragon's home. The first one was a broken cog. Victor beamed and said, "This is from the textile factory I collected when I first came to England. It took longer than expected to collect the gold I needed to get what I wanted. The owner was a brute and beat his workers till they were unable to work, then he would fire them and hire children for half the price. One even died. The cog was the cleanest cog she had ever seen. It glistened. It had certainly seen more care than the house had when she had first come to question him. She wasn't sure whether the neatness was a new thing along with the cleanup of the rest of the house. Victor glowed with pride. It won the most productive mill last year. Even though they have 2 days off a week and only work 40 hours. I hope others will follow the trend. Rain followed him as he went to the next cabinet. She stalled him before he explained the next item. "Tell me about Eleanor." The light of pride dimmed considerably as he stopped by the new cabinet. Inside was a single embroidered handkerchief. He tapped the edge of the framed glass as he thought. He had probably thought he would never have to articulate this story to anyone, so she allowed him time to find his words. "I met her at an inn just outside the city. Not that it mattered where I met her. It was a reputable place and her carriage had broken down and she was forced to walk. Her footman carried her things. That was Sebastian. I didn't know it was a show. She was charming and intelligent. We spent the night debating the merits of different laws in the Empire compared to the other countries. She rode with me the next day. I bonded with her that night. Within a week, she had figured how to steal everything that wasn't bolted down. She left one day while I was out. I put out that she was kidnapped, as I didn't want to reveal her betrayal." She winced. "That is honest. Dragons usually are honest. We tend to lose our powers if we start to lie." That was a bit of dragon lore she wasn't familiar with. She would have to ask her father the validity of his claim. In the meantime, she would take everything he said with the pinch of salt required of every detective. "But you didn't find her." She was found floating in the Thames a few days later. What happened when the police became involved? This was before the police. It was one of the cases that convinced the local government to instigate a policing system like the continent has. They found out she had a lover. He was passed out, drunk in the maiden's hair with her blood under his fingernails. He confessed after that. But that wasn't enough. Rain frowned, confused. Why did they pardon him then? She had assumed there was some circumstantial evidence that had been ambiguous enough to convince the governor. Politics. The governor didn't like dragons. He thought we were invaders. He didn't last long, but he lasted long enough to bury the evidence and give Sebastian a pardon. When my lawyer told me there was no way to get a conviction when the governor himself was against me, I confronted Sebastian. I left the city after that. Since you found his body chopped up only the other day, you must know I left him alive. I have no motive to wait all this time to find him now. She believed him for now as it mirrored her own thoughts on the murder. Do you know what happened to him when you left town? No. I was frustrated with the system. Eleanor and Sebastian were merely a symptom of what is wrong here, so I went away. He stepped away from the glass cabinets. You don't think I killed her or Sebastian? It wasn't a question, but she answered it anyway, no. I think you would have saved yourself the hassle of this investigation and just eaten them. I think this was done by a human. He flashed her a grin. It wasn't my charm that convinced you of my innocence. So, when you close this case, will you accept my proposal? Would she never be able to convince those around her she wasn't interested in a relationship that would turn her into a virtual slave? No. I turned you down because I'm never going to marry. His voice was thoughtful as his eyes dropped from her own. So it isn't a dragon thing? Rain wanted him to know all the reasons she wouldn't accept his proposal, so he didn't get his hopes up that she might change her mind one day. Yes, that as well. You guys keep slaves. He growled in frustration. It isn't slavery. She wasn't convinced by his fierce denial. You can call it whatever you like, it is slavery. It is a reciprocal slavery. You would own me. As if that would make the prospect any more palatable. That still isn't very appealing. You haven't been able to show your best side. So far, she had seen his temper and his entanglement in a confidence scam. Not flattering in the least. No. I suppose not. Normally I show off my chemistry skills. But can I tempt you? His voice was so hopeful she felt sympathy for him, but she wasn't sure what he was talking about until he laid his hand on her waist. She knew she should step back, that if she gave him any indication, he would always chase her. But she was tempted as well. He was striking and interesting, and what other time would she have a chance to kiss a dragon? He placed his other hand gently on her cheek. The warmth seeped into her. His proximity warmed her deeper than the touch, turning her insides into a quivery jelly. Victor's gaze was on her lips. Step away now if you don't want me to. Her answer was to lick her lips. He lowered his head slowly. His lips grazed hers, asking permission. She opened her lips and merged with Victor. She stepped towards him, all her senses drawn to where they were joined. She brought her own hand up and laid it on his shoulder. The lack of heightened sensory connection brought her back to reality. She touched him with her mechanical hand. The hand that was the only reason the dragon even desired her, as dragons only collected unique things. Rain stumbled away, catching herself on the pedestal behind her. Victor didn't follow her. He stood with his arms limp beside him as he asked wistfully, Rain. We are not that familiar, sir. Her voice harsher than she intended. It was because she felt as a fool to even give in to the temptation he had offered. She couldn't even pretend that he had manipulated her into the situation, as he had made his desires very clear. I think we are, but I will call you Miss Ancaster if that is your wish. His voice sad, though he had reverted to her more formal title at least. It is, and we can't do this again. She straightened and tugged on her coat to neaten the line. It also gave her something to do, her eyes steadfastly lowered. He asked, This? She waved a hand to indicate the two of them. This. A smile only touched the corner of his mouth. You mean the kiss? Heat stained her cheeks and she ran a finger around the starched collar of her coat. Angry that he teased her instead of having a serious conversation. Yes, because I am not going to be in your collection. To remind herself, just as much to remind him why she would never be able to take their desires any further. I know. You told me. But is an affair off the table? His wistful tone made her steam. He only wished to collect her as a trophy. It wasn't her he wanted. Yes. She growled. His face dropped. She had been propositioned before, but this was certainly the most unique. Rain muttered some excuses and made her escape. Everything Victor was confused her. He was arrogant and possessive. But he was also clever and handsome. It didn't help that her own feelings were only more confusing. Chapter 10. Rain had barely stepped into her house when her 14-year-old sister, Catherine, barreled into her. Perfect. You can take me shopping. Catherine caught her hand and dragged her outside to the carriage that had just delivered Rain. Macy is ill and I desperately need to get out of the house. Catherine turned to the driver and gave instructions. The carriage was already moving before Rain could even come up with a few excuses for why she shouldn't go shopping with her sister. Instead of whining, Rain asked, "What are we shopping for?" "Books." Of course, Rain wasn't even sure why she asked. Her sister was on an endless quest for more knowledge. "Surely you have enough. Father even gave you a wall in the library for the books so you have a place to store them. I'm starting a new field of study." Of all the Duke's children, Catherine was the most brilliant. She preferred science, and every year she got excited about a new experiment or field. She had outstripped every school and tutor their father could find for her. Rain asked, knowing the answer would be amusing, "What are you studying now?" "Electricity. I thought I'd see if I could bring something back to life."